The first thing to check will be the bodywork on the bike. So initially, crash damage. So what you do is you look at the extremities of your bike, things like your mirrors. Now there's some marks on this mirror here, but you can tell that they're indicative of maybe catching a wall or something if they're taking the bike down the alley. The things that you need to actually look at are going to be things like your levers. Are they ground flat? Your handlebar end weights, same thing. Underneath your foot pegs, have a look at that. Sometimes the hero blobs, as they call them, can be scraped. That's usually an indication of just scraping on the floor. But crash damage, it'll be things like the crash bars here, because there's actually a metal crash bar underneath that. Your foot pegs, your exhaust may be scraped, your pannier. You get the general idea on the crash damage. You can also check if the bike's straight by getting right behind the bike, or right in front of it rather, get down and see if the front wheel is directly in line with the back wheel. If it's like this, there could be a problem. Condition of the paintwork. You can usually tell on bikes if it's been resprayed. The only thing that a lot of dealers, or so a lot of manufacturers, lacquer over is the tank. On this particular bike, there is no lacquer on the tank, but that's just pan-Europeans. But if you have any other bike like a GSXR or a ZX10 or anything like this, the tanks will be lacquered over, but usually the fairing panels won't be. If the fairing panels are lacquered over, that could be an indication that the bike's had a respray at some point. So a scratch here, look, you can see that's actually a crack. I'll show you a photograph of what happened there, some marks on it. And believe it or not, yes, it was an old guy in a mobility electric vehicle. Quite frightening really, isn't it? General paintwork, you're also looking for mismatches in colour if it's been resprayed. And if you look here as well, I don't know whether you can see it on camera, but you can see there's a slight mismatch there, but that's just where the lacquer is crazing for some reason. The bike is 20 odd years old. And there's another mark because of the old guy. No insurance on those things. I'd advise that you never look at a bike in the dark for this reason, because if there are any bad matching panels, it's highly unlikely that you're going to see much in the dark. So always try and make sure that it's daytime when you do. On to something like the steering now. So to check the steering, you really need to have the bike either on the main stand or have somebody put it on the side stand and pull the bike over so the front wheel is raised in the air. When the front wheel is in the air, on a bike like this it's difficult to do because it's so heavy. I need somebody to press down on it. But you make sure that the steering goes from what we call lock to lock, hitting the lock stops. If any of those lock stops on the frame are missing and the bars go all the way into the tank, that's a very strong indication that the bike has been crashed at some point. You're also checking with the wheel in the air that there are no cables being trapped, and you're also checking that the bike doesn't centre the steering. If it's smooth from left to right, that's a good indication. If it feels like it drops and wants to stay in the centre, then that's an indication of worn steering head bearings. Another indication or a check for steering head bearings is to take the bike off the stand and push the bike with the front brake on, and you may hear clicking. Now that's usually a badly adjusted steering head as opposed to a worn one. With your suspension, front and rear, you're initially checking that the suspension dives and rises at a similar rate. So again, with the bike off the stand, you push down and let go, push down and let go. And the bike suspension should dive and rise at a similar sort of rate, showing that the compression and the rebound damping is working fine. And it's the same with the front suspension. Take the bike off the stand, front brake on, pump it. You may hear a little bit of a squidging sound. It's not a major issue with that, but what you are looking for again is the diving and rising at a similar rate. You're also looking on fork legs of any oil leaks. Now this has only just recently had fork seals fitted, so you're looking here to see if there's any excess oil. The actual rule in the UK, if it's slightly weeping, you'll still get away with it on an MOT, which is an annual check in the UK. But if it's excessive, you can tell the danger will be the oil leaking down the fork leg and possibly onto the brake, and that's not what you want. So they're fine. If a bike's been stood for several months, you may find a little bit of a weep on that fork leg, but it's possibly because the fork seal has hardened slightly, and maybe 20-30 miles run will flex the seal back up again and it'll reseal. We have had this happen in the past. Brake discs and pads. When I restored this bike a few years ago, it had brand new brake discs on it, brand new brake pads. I'd resprayed the calipers, etc. So what you're looking for on the discs first of all is the wear. If you feel across the disc like this, you will feel a lip if it's excessively worn. Now this is beautiful, it's worn really nicely. There's no excess grooves in there. All of these holes are nice and clear, where sometimes the brake dust can jam those up. So that disc is absolutely fine. You're also checking on a disc for warpage, but you can only really tell on the disc when you're riding the thing for warpage, and we'll go into that later. Brake pads. You'll have to look down the edge of the disc to see the brake pads. You're probably not going to see it from here, but again, these are new pads. I'll show you a photograph of a new pad, and you can see it's got meat. We call it meat or brake pad lining, and when it's worn the lining goes down to the point where if you're too late it'll take through the metal, and the metal on the brake pad will also rub onto the disc, causing excess wear and probably will damage your disc as well. All of these things will be a good negotiation in the price if you find them. The same goes with your rear disc. On a bike like this, it's a lot harder to see, so you really have to start getting on your knees and making sure that again everything's okay. It was a new disc. The pads are getting low on that one and they're going to need replacing pretty soon. It's because I do a lot of slow speed riding too. With any bike that you buy, you need to check if it's got any kind of decent service history with it. If you buy a motorcycle that's relatively new and it has a full service history, it's likely to command better prices than something that's got no paperwork with it whatsoever. Tyres. These things can be quite expensive, so you do need to check the tyres for wear and condition. In the UK, the legal minimum on a tyre, motorcycle tyre, is 1mm over 3/4 of the width all the way around. We have tread-on tyres to disperse water. It's as simple as that. Now with these tyres, this particular one, the BT023s, I don't really get on with, which are the Bridgestones, and the reason being, I'm quite anal about making sure that my tyres are the correct pressure, and even though these are always at the correct pressure, you can probably not see, these are starting to wear in the corners in here, and it's picking off like this, which is sometimes an indication that somebody hasn't inflated their tyres correctly. There'll be more tread in the middle and they'll be worn on the edges just here. So that's an indication that the tyres may not have been looked after. You're also checking for things like stones and nails in your tread, possibly cracks in the sidewall or splits. If it's hit a curb or had an accident, it could damage the tyre. You're looking at around £75 to £90 for a front tyre on one of these bikes, so you can imagine you'd need to knock that off the price. I have a new Bridgestone T30 ordered for this. With a rear tyre, if a bike does very high mileage, you will probably find, well with both tyres, that the tyre will tend to wear a lot in the middle. If it wears a lot in the middle, it's going to square off, as we call it, which means that it comes around here and then has a lip before it goes flat. And what will happen there is you go around sweeping bends, you'll feel the bike weaving, and that's an indication that you need to get rid of your tyres and get something new with a good profile, a nice round shape to it. As you can see, this tyre is nearly new, not had a problem with that. Just regarding the brakes as well, you notice here that this spins very freely. That's something else you need to check with your brakes to make sure that they're not binding. Sometimes again, because the bike's been stud, you will get that problem. And if that's binding, then you'd need to either do it yourself or pay some extra money, which will come off the negotiation price. Cobwebs. When you... no. I'm just too lazy to clean it at the moment. That's something else as well. If you make sure the bike's been cleaned and looked after, you get a general idea. This particular bike is a shaft drive, so it's practically maintenance free. But with some bikes you get chains and sprockets. With those, you're checking that the chain has been well lubricated, you're checking that the sprockets have got a nice shape like that. As soon as the sprockets start doing this, it's showing that it's worn. And if you pull the chain back on the back of the sprocket, the more it moves, the more worn it is. Another way of checking your chain is where you check the tension on a chain, check it side to side, and again the more it moves side to side, the more worn it is. If a chain is rusty and it's got tight spots in it and it's very badly worn, that's a very large indication that the bike has not been looked after, so beware.